And I think it's clear that liberal individualism, or that even the kind of edgy philosophical version of that, we sort of live, I think, in the confused, maybe almost aftermath of where that's gone. Like, we've gone as far as we possibly can, chasing the flows of desire. And perhaps there is a kind of return or an interest in questions of limits and essences and types and kinds. But more than that, I suppose, I'm first and foremost interested in what the Greeks were interested in. And this question, where the course is going to begin with this idea of physis, which is quite hard to translate, but we might think of it in terms of growth. You know, that if you think about a world in which we don't already have these kind of categories or disciplines of science and philosophy, and, you know, the separation of these sorts of worldviews or modes, frames, ways of looking at things, and you're simply observing the difference between different kinds of things. And here are some things that are alive and grow, and here are other things that were alive and are now dead, and here are some other things that were never alive at all, or in any meaningful way that we can understand, right? So these kind of separations about that relate to questions of growth, cycles. Like, if you spend time thinking about plants, it's very obvious that there's something going on here, and it's quite hard to keep plants alive, actually. It's always very good when one does so, but even then, one is kind of perhaps pruning little bits of dead plants, and, you know, how does removing the dead plant part of the plant contribute to the overall health of the plant? Right, very interesting questions. So, like, these very, very basic questions, really, and observations about life, about cycles, about what a thing is, whether a thing is alive or whether it is dead, or what we mean by alive and what we mean by dead, and what we mean by nature, including our own nature. What role, what participation do we have? I mean, this is a very pressing question, it seems to me. You know, we have kind of often very anxious versions. We have often very anxious answers to that question. You know, when we think about the Anthropocene and panic around climate change and the environment and those kinds of things, where the idea is that human beings have irreparably changed the earth. And I'm not making a judgment on that claim. I'm not particularly interested in whether that's true or false, in the sense, I think what I am interested in are the kind of concepts and the metaphysics that underpin our understanding of how we are part of this thing called nature, or if we are. Some people would argue that we're not, that we are fundamentally, in many ways, perhaps opposed to nature, or that our capacity to build and construct and create and create artifice and so on, of all kinds, has fundamentally and irreparably damaged our participation, or changed our participation in nature, such that we can only talk about kind of second nature, or, you know, the idea that even the concept or the construct of the idea of nature is an imposition. People will make this argument often in relation to domestic animals, you know, that our intervention into breeding has, in a way, remove the possibility of access to whatever came first. Like, the cow is not the cow. The cow is whatever human beings have made of the cow, you know. But I'm still fundamentally interested in this, what comes first, and what we've forgotten about nature in that basic Greek sense. And this is clearly something that Heidegger returns to, but also perhaps more dramatically in a more controversial way, somebody like Pentti Linkola, who's very, very, very controversial, kind of anti-humanist, environmentalist, we might say, very interested in the biosphere, but you know, there's a branch of a kind of deep ecology or a green movement which becomes extremely anti-human, right? And I definitely am not kind of defending that, but I think it's worth absolutely looking at these, where some of these ideas take you, as regard non-human nature. There's also the manifest bomb in the history of thinking about nature in the form of Darwinism, and which really places us back in the kind of species question. And when, for example, Nietzsche, who has this complex relation to Darwin, starts talking about the human animal, there's a very obvious and domestication and all of those things, like, you know, breeding and so on, and things that are kind of quite unpalatable to any kind of moral conception of the human. But he's, you know, cleverly unpicking all of those pretensions. We have this ongoing question, I think, about who or what we are, what is our nature, is there any such thing as human nature, what are we making an appeal to when we appeal to that. Also the question of sexes is often covered over in the name of a sort of generic humanism, or the idea that there is a generic human who is sort of neither male nor female, but somehow both, or neither. But this thing called the human, you know, which on some level we might also want to defend. It's a very complicated question when, you know, what we mean when we refer to the human. And then our role, or our participation in nature. And again, we're back to some of the Spinoza questions. We're back to the Greeks. We're also back to German Romanticism, something I'm very interested in. People, thinkers like Schelling, very difficult, some of which is really difficult, but extremely interesting. And trying to point to this, you know, connection, this almost ineffable, participation that we have in growth, in life, in being, and I suppose, yeah, all of these grand but very old questions, I guess.